Alright, if you saw my last video about what they could do to improve PvP as a whole for Division 2, this video is going to focus on what they can do to improve PVE. Now, the majority of players in Division 2 are without a doubt PvE oriented. PvP is a minority in the game. Now, it doesn't mean to say that I don't value PvE or I don't value PvE. I enjoy both types of content. I just find that PvE gets a little bit more boring, a little bit more stale, quicker. So after PvE, I go to PvP. That's just how I am. I think there's there's plenty of other people who probably have that same mentality. Once PvE dries up, you probably move on to PvP, or you just drop the game all entirely. With that being said, let's move on to what I think PvE actually needs and what it can add to vastly improve its current offering. Alright, so starting it off, I'd like to add, finally, some type of open world public events. Now, many of you are familiar with games like Destiny, even World of Warcraft. But open world public events are basically, you're running around in the LZ and an event happens, some boss or some really intense fight happens where other players can come and basically join you and help you out without having to group up, without having to team up. They just are able to all join, meet each other in the same world. I think, that was a huge mistake from Division 1 not including open world public events. I think it was a huge mistake for Division 2 not to include these types of events. Yes, they have the DZ, but the DZ does not meet the requirements of a public event area. There's no events that really necessitate having multiple agents there. A single agent can clear a landmark. A single agent in Division 1 could have cleared the contamination events. There's no need for this interaction. So what this suggestion is including mechanics or including events that require multiple agents to meet up with each other in the open world voluntarily without having to pre-organize a group or join each other or matchmake. Just flat out, you're running through the street, this agent's through the streets, you see the event and bam, you're in each other, you're kind of in a shared world. To expand on that idea with a second point would be the inclusion of something like rare world bosses. World bosses is kind of a concept that I largely base on playing World of Warcraft, but World bosses actually goes back even further. I mean, you can look into games like Final Fantasy VI, for the Super Nintendo. There's random bosses in a lot of older RPG type games where you didn't have to fight them, you didn't have to encounter them, you might have never even come across them ever. Sometimes they were hidden, sometimes they were just random. Sometimes you had to do this really articulate thing to unlock them, to attack them, whatever. World bosses, the concept of a world boss is this really tough, extremely difficult enemy. So think of something like I guess in the context of Division 2 would be a tank or an APC or an attack helicopter. That just kind of is in the world at random, maybe triggered by something, maybe not, maybe just depending on, maybe there's like a 1% chance that whenever you start the game, you might have one of these guys wandering around somewhere in your LZ. Now you don't actually have to get a notification, you don't have to say anything, and the only chance that you have of actually finding these people is by running around the LZ and actually exploring, every time you go through it. And it's completely random, it doesn't really take away anything, it doesn't really add any like huge oh my gods to the game, but it just provides this nice feel where like you happen to run across one of these people in the LZ, and it's a oh poo moment where you're trying to look on your friends list to see if there's anybody else on who can come and join you and help you take this thing out. Obviously, you'd want to have really nice rewards tied to that type of event. But that would be another thing that would just make PvE even more interesting, where you actually want to answer the call, like, oh, somebody's calling for help because they've just found the super tank, or they just found the super attack helicopter, or the Giga drone. Whatever it is. Like these rare events where players want to actually try to attack and want to actually try to get in on them. That would just be a nice interesting thing. My third point, which kind of again builds even further onto this, would be instanced event type areas. And I guess that sounds kind of confusing, but instance event type areas would basically be something similar to the survival mode from Division 1. where you queue up into a, let's just call it a mission. So you queue up into the mission, and in survival it was basically everyone for themselves, or unless you had like a pre-made group, right? You would basically just fall into the area, and it was basically whoever got to the DZ, you know, and whoever got the gear first, and whoever got the stuff first, and whatever, and that was it. One run and you're done. Well, the instance event type areas would basically be the exact same thing, except with a more mission-oriented purpose. So you would have, who knows, 4, maybe 8, maybe 12, however many players queue up into matchmaking. They would all go into this same open world area, maybe even take like the current dark zones and cut them into like 3 or 4 different pieces each. So there would be like a total of 12 or so different areas inside of the DZs that could potentially become a mission-based area. And you know, there would basically be something like you have to go defuse the bomb, you have to stop the DC-62 production, or you have to, you know, destroy this thing and basically blow up this thing, or assassinate this target, or prevent, you know, these civilians from being killed. Be a short-lived, organized PVE type DZ activity, or just PVE, you know, organized LZ activity. It doesn't have to be in the DZ, it doesn't have to be any of that. It could be just anywhere, just any sort of mission area that you queue up into, go into, and do something that's not quite a mission. Okay, there might be even multiple different events going on in this area at the same time, and you've got a limited time to do them. And you know, if you all stick together or whatever, you know, maybe there's even a sort of competitiveness where like the person who actually does it, or the person who gets the kills or whatever, actually gets the points for, you know, the rewards at the end of the event. My fourth suggestion, and this is kind of, you know, this is a pretty obvious one to me. They need to bring back incursions. I know incursions in Division 1 were not great, but that wasn't entirely the fault of bad bosses. Falcon Lost, which was a APC that never moved, which was just boring. It was a boring fight. I mean, I'm sorry, it was just, the mechanics were just eh. Then you moved into the second one, which was Dragon's Nest, which I thought was going to be really good, and I was kind of excited for it when I heard about it. And then you get to the final boss, and it's a fire truck on blocks that doesn't move. I was baffled that they just did another non-moving vehicle again. That was terrible. Then we went into the third one, where it was Clear Sky. That one consisted of a helicopter that had crashed, or sorry, not a helicopter. That one consisted of a Osprey that crashed, and you had to disable its gun that was being controlled to attack you, which, again, another non-moving vehicle that is shooting at you. Again, not the greatest mechanics. The only incursion that actually probably got good reviews was Stolen Signal, and that one was kind of similar to like a mini raid where you actually had individual rooms that you needed to clear with a different boss and different mechanics in each room. And that one was actually fairly well liked, even though it actually required specific mechanics for kind of like specific areas in each boss, which is odd that it was probably the most liked of all the incursions from Division 1, yet seems to be the point of contention for why they didn't include specific mechanics for the raid in Division 2. So it's kind of a dumb decision to me. The most liked incursion is the one you copied the least. Okay, that's a genius decision to me. Fantastic job, developers. Good job, Massive. A+. All right, so and if you're not familiar with the concept of incursions, basically it's like a mini raid, just like kind of like a single boss, or maybe a minor boss and then a major boss. And it's basically like just a 4-man raid. You know, it's not quite the raid mechanics. Maybe there's some small mechanics that you do along it, but basically it is just the hardest content in the game, you know, before a raid. Or basically it fits in that it's harder than a heroic, but it's easier than a raid, and it offers a good chance for, you know, players to get some kind of exclusive type rewards that are just tied to that incursion. It gives, you know, players a chance to kind of practice some of the mechanics that might be included in something like, you know, the future raid. So basically it's kind of like a mini version where, you know, you just get your feet wet, get a little taste of what could possibly happen next. And then moving on to my fifth point, adding some sort of exotic quests, exotic bounties, or even like exotic missions. If you played Destiny, you might know what I'm talking about, where, you know, you had something like the Black Spindle, where there was a hidden mission inside of a mission that, you know, you didn't quite know was there unless you actually, you know, went and found it and just kind of happened to get lucky and discover it, or somebody told you about it, or your friend watched it on YouTube, something along those lines. You wouldn't have known about it. And then once you actually activate this thing, it is a really incredibly difficult and probably one of the most difficult things to earn, you know, at that time. And basically the prize for completing this event was a exotic weapon, the Black Spindle sniper rifle, which was actually a really great sniper rifle to have in the game. But there was other missions and other events like that in the game. You know, there was kind of like pieces that you had to unlock, and then once you got, you know, like four of the pieces, you unlocked a specific mission that, you know, you could go and get your exotic fusion rifle, or your exotic hand cannon, or you know, whatever, your exotic pulse rifle. And they had these missions that you basically, by playing the game, you unlocked, you know, little tidbits of information or little pieces, or you unlocked a bounty for something, and that basically kept you actively playing the game, or at least actively playing specific parts of the game, because you had a good chance of getting those things. It was harder content. It wasn't quite the most extreme raid-like content, but at that point it was harder than, you know, just playing a normal mission or playing a heroic mission. It was just a really difficult thing to get a very specific reward, and it wasn't RNG based. It was, if you managed to beat this difficult content, you get this, and so it was done. You know, it wasn't RNG. You did it, and it was over. And I think that would be a great thing to add to PVE, so that people just, you know, you don't have to worry about so much RNG. There's nothing wrong with working for a reward really hard and getting it. You know, like, stop messing with people. Just give them the damn thing. My second to last suggestion would be solo-only mini raids or heroic type events. Basically, these would be like events that are only scaled to a single person. So, like, you can't have a team. There's no one else with you. Just one person, just your own skills, your own abilities to beat whatever content it is. The reason I say something like this is because there are a lot of solo players in the game. There is already content that is focused on having 4 players. So if you play heroic or if you play the raid, you need this many players because it is all focused on this. And yes, you might be able to do it by yourself, but it is designed and intended to be played by 4 people. Or in the case of the raid, 8 people. And there's nothing you can do about it. But the game does not go to the extent to reward a single person. So for the game to actually add something that basically tells the solo player that, you know, the game is there for them too, it would be great for it to add specific activities just for a solo player. These events would be designed for one person. They would be only playable by a single person. You couldn't group up, you couldn't matchmake for them, and they would be extremely difficult, almost like a solo raid. So they would have mechanics, they would have interesting things, they would have incredible boss fights. They might even require you to have special considerations for your stats on your builds. You know, you might need a lot of hazard protection. You might need a lot of, you know, protection from elites. You might even need, you know, to use specific skills, certain weapons. Who knows? You know, but that would basically be the point, to test a single person's skill in the game, and that's it. You know, it wouldn't be designed for multiple players, and it would give you, you know, like, if you managed to beat this as a solo player, it would basically be kind of saying, like, you know what, as a solo player, you are extremely good at the game. You know, it would basically be like a pat on the back to the solo player who does this all the time for all the content, except it would actually be a challenge designed specifically for them, with mechanics specifically for them. All right, my last suggestion for what they should do with PVE. Now, I feel like I should explain this before I suggest it. You're kind of going to already know what I'm saying. But with the game, especially in the PvP, it's basically been forced into something that it shouldn't be. And with the DZ specifically, a lot of players aren't happy with what it's become. It's not good for PvE players. No matter what you do, if there's the ability for somebody to kill you, it is not good for a lot of PvE players who just don't want to do that. And they're not going to do that. The more they try to kind of like nudge it so that PvE players will want to go into the DZ, the worse the DZ actually gets for the PvP players. The worse that it gets for the kind of middle ground players who like to do a little bit of both. When you kind of try to make this system PvE friendly when it's inherently, purposefully not supposed to be, it ruins the experience for everyone. You know, it was a mistake that they didn't include it in the beginning, and I think it's a mistake if they just keep ignoring the fact that this game needs a PvE DZ. I understand that a lot of you think that the PvE, oh, the DZ shouldn't be PvE. The whole point of the DZ is that it's PvEVP. Okay, well, By PVE DZ, I go back to kind of like the first suggestions where like open world public events. This wouldn't be the DZ as in it's the DZ, you get the same rewards, you get the same loot, you get all that stuff. No, I mean obviously it would be a open world type event, so you can open chests, you can, you know, find objects, you can find items and whatever. It wouldn't be the same thing as like, oh, you can earn exclusive Dark Zone rewards in the DZ. No. This would be like a PvE version. I mean, it doesn't even have to be called the DZ. You could just call it the PvE zone, if that makes you feel better. The PvE gray zone. Maybe that's better. PvE light gray, PvE slightly dark. Whatever you want to call it. I think it's time that the game gives a friendly PvE area to players who just want to run around and, you know, just casually interact with other players doing PvE content without having to be obligated to join them or not join them or help them or not help them. Just doing whatever they want, running around, seeing other people, seeing their builds, seeing, you know, what their tactics are, and then leaving. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't have to have the same structure as the DZ. It doesn't have to have, oh, you know, super easy bosses and super easy fights and whatever. Like, it could be completely different. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.